Tokyo, Japan, March 1943. The faint hum of rain against the tiled roof filled the room. A thin, steady rhythm that seemed to echo the tension inside. Beneath the soft glow of a single hanging lamp, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto sat at the head of a long cedar table. His fingers lightly tracing the edge of a report marked Confidential, Boeing B-29 Superfortress. Outside, the air was heavy with the scent of spring, but inside the Naval Intelligence Room, it was the scent of cold tobacco and fear. Rear Admiral Yoshio Nishina, Japan's Chief of Technical Intelligence, stood stiffly at the far end of the room. He adjusted his glasses and began to speak, his voice thin but deliberate. Admiral Yamamoto, the Americans are building a new bomber. They call it the B-29. It's unlike anything we've ever seen. Yamamoto's eyes rose from the document. How unlike? Nishina hesitated before replying. It flies at altitudes above 30,000 feet, faster than any of our interceptors can reach. It carries over 9 tons of bombs. And it can strike Japan directly, from bases as far as India or Alaska. A low murmur rippled through the officers in the room. One man scoffed quietly, "No aircraft can fly that far and return." Another whispered about American exaggerations. Propaganda. But Yamamoto remained silent. He leaned back, staring at the blueprint sketch on the table, a sleek, monstrous bird of silver and steel, its 4 engines drawn with meticulous detail. He knew the Americans didn't boast idly. Not about machines. For years, he had studied them, their engineers, their factories, their relentless industry. When others saw decadence, Yamamoto saw potential. He had warned Japan's high command long before Pearl Harbor, in the first 6 months of war with the United States and Great Britain. "I will run wild and win victory upon victory. But after that, I have no expectation of success." Now, as he stared at the image of the B-29, he realized those 6 months were already gone. "Show me its range," Yamamoto said quietly. Nishina unrolled a chart of the Pacific, pinning its edges to the table. With a trembling hand, he drew a red circle over the Japanese archipelago. The line stretched outward, past the Marianas, over the Philippines, and brushed against the coast of India. The room fell silent. Even before the war had begun, Japan's strategic planners believed their geography, their island isolation, was their greatest defense. But the circle on that map made that illusion vanish. There would be no distance far enough, no mountain high enough, to escape the reach of that machine. Rain drummed harder now, a relentless tapping on the windowpane. Yamamoto looked up, his face unreadable, then spoke, his voice low, almost sorrowful. "If this aircraft becomes reality, Japan's fate will be sealed." No one dared to respond. He rose from his chair, walking to the window that overlooked the Imperial Palace gardens. For a moment, he watched the falling rain trace down the glass. Then he said, more to himself than to anyone else, "The Americans have learned the art of war as an industry. We are still fighting as craftsmen." Behind him, the other officers shifted uneasily. They had seen Yamamoto confident, commanding, fiery, but never like this, never quiet, never defeated. Somewhere in the distance, the bells of Tokyo Station chimed the hour. The war still roared across the Pacific, victories still claimed by radio broadcasts, but in this room, on this night, one man who understood the true balance of power had already seen the end. Yamamoto closed the folder, slid it across the table, and turned back to Nishina. "How long before it enters service?" "Intelligence estimates, late 1944, sir." He nodded. "Then we have 1 year left to fight a war we cannot win." The rain continued its endless percussion, as if marking the countdown. Washington, D.C., April 1943. The marble corridors of the Pentagon echoed with hurried footsteps and the rustle of papers. Outside, the city buzzed with war, ration trucks, khaki uniforms, and the metallic pulse of factories working through the night. Inside, Major General Henry H. Hap Arnold, commanding general of the U.S. Army Air Forces, stood over a massive engineering blueprint. Spread across his desk was the future, the Boeing B-29 Superfortress, the most advanced bomber ever conceived. "Gentlemen," Arnold said to the gathered officers and engineers, "this isn't just another aircraft. This is the key to ending the war." The B-29 was more than a bomber. It was a declaration of industrial might, pressurized cabins, remote-controlled turrets, 4 massive Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines capable of lifting the beast 35,000 feet into the thin blue sky. At that altitude, it could cruise above any Japanese anti-aircraft gun, far beyond the reach of Zero fighters gasping for air. Boeing's engineers had called it Project Superfortress, but in Arnold's mind, It was something even greater, the embodiment of a new era of warfare. Machines, not men, would decide the future. In a dim corner of the room, an aide read aloud a decrypted Japanese intelligence intercept. It mentioned Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, and the recent reconnaissance of American bomber development. Arnold looked up sharply. Yamamoto knows? Yes, sir. Their intelligence service obtained some partial specifications. Enough to understand the threat. Arnold's jaw tightened. He knew Yamamoto by reputation, the Harvard-educated strategist, the architect of Pearl Harbor, a man who had warned his superiors not to provoke the United States. If anyone in Japan could grasp what the B-29 meant, it would be him. Then he'll know what's coming, Arnold said. Good. Tokyo, the same night. The Imperial Navy's Grand Strategy meeting stretched late into the evening. The room was filled with the clatter of cigarette trays and the faint hum of a ventilation fan. Admirals and generals from across the empire gathered around a long table polished to a mirror shine. Charts showed the Pacific Ocean dotted with red and blue markers, each one representing battles fought. Territories lost, fleets sunk. Yamamoto sat at the far end, silent, his expression carved from stone. Across from him, Admiral Osamu Nagano, chief of the Naval General Staff, was in mid-speech. We still hold the Marianas, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies. If we concentrate our naval aviation there, we can block any American advance. Yamamoto's eyes drifted to the window, the faint glow of Tokyo's city lights flickering in the distance. Then he spoke, interrupting. And what if their bombers can reach those islands without carriers? What if they can strike us directly, from thousands of miles away? The room went still. Nagano frowned. Impossible, no bomber has such range. Yamamoto reached for a file, the same one from the March briefing, and slid it across the table. This one does. One by one, the admirals leaned forward, scanning the specifications. Some scoffed, others whispered, a few grew pale. 32 tons of weight? 4 engines? It's fantasy, even the Americans cannot. Yamamoto cut him off. They can, and they will. He stood, his voice rising for the first time. You do not understand what we are facing. Their factories build ships faster than we can sink them. Their foundries pour more steel in a week than we do in a month. And now they have an aircraft that can carry war across the Pacific without ever needing to risk a fleet. The silence that followed was suffocating. The only sound was the faint ticking of the wall clock, every second echoing the countdown he had mentioned weeks earlier. Finally, Nagano broke the silence. Then what do you propose we do? Yamamoto exhaled slowly, the weight of inevitability pressing down on him. Sue for peace, before the storm reaches our shores. A murmur of outrage erupted. One admiral slammed his fist on the table. Peace? After the emperor has committed our empire to total victory? After our men have died for every inch of the Pacific? Yamamoto looked around the table. Then they will die for nothing. His words hung in the air like smoke. He had crossed a line, not of loyalty, but of honesty. In that moment, Yamamoto ceased to be the empire's symbol of triumph. He became its conscience. And for that, he knew, he would be silenced, one way or another. That night, as he left the Imperial Navy building, the rain had stopped, the city smelled of wet earth and coal smoke. Tokyo glowed faintly beneath a cloudy moon. Yamamoto paused by his car, glancing westward, toward the invisible ocean that separated him from the American continent. Somewhere beyond that horizon, the B-29 was taking shape in Boeing's factories, piece by piece, rivet by rivet. He imagined the sound of its engines, a deep, rolling thunder that would one day echo above these same skies. And for the first time since Pearl Harbor, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto felt something he had never allowed himself to feel before. Bougainville, Solomon Islands, April 18, 1943. The jungle was alive with the drone of insects and the distant crash of waves against coral shores. Overhead, clouds drifted in a slow grey procession, streaking the morning light with pale gold. Inside a Nakajima G4M, Betty, bomber, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto sat near the window, gazing at the endless canopy below. His uniform was immaculate as always, his cap resting lightly in his hands. Yet there was a shadow behind his calm eyes, a quiet heaviness that no one in the aircraft could mistake. He had risen early that morning, shaving in silence as the sea breeze slipped through the wooden shutters of his quarters on Rabaul. His aides had chatted nervously over breakfast, trying to lighten the mood. Yamamoto, as always, had smiled, polite, distant, before boarding the plane that would take him to inspect frontline positions on Bougainville. It was a journey he had insisted upon, though his staff had begged him to cancel. The Americans may have broken our codes. One officer had warned, you would be a target if they knew your route. Yamamoto had merely nodded. If I am to lead men into death, I should not fear to meet it myself. Now, as the G4M leveled out at 6.500 feet, he reached into his coat pocket and unfolded a small photograph, his family, smiling faintly beneath a blooming cherry tree. The petals in the photo had been falling that day. He remembered thinking how beautiful, and how short-lived, that beauty was. He looked away from the picture and back out toward the horizon. There, somewhere far beyond the rolling green islands, the B-29s were coming. Not yet, but soon. He could feel it. Hundreds of miles east, at Henderson Field, Guadalcanal, American pilots from the 339th Fighter Squadron, flying Lockheed P-38 Lightnings, crouched beside their aircraft, waiting for the signal to launch. It was a secret mission, one known to only a handful of men. Major John Mitchell, the squadron leader, had gathered them around a map of the Solomon Islands earlier that morning. Gentlemen, intelligence has given us the itinerary of Admiral Yamamoto himself. He'll be flying from Rabaul to Bougainville this morning. If our timing's right, we'll intercept him over the jungle. Estimated time of contact, 9:34 a.m. The pilots exchanged glances. Some grinned, others stayed silent. Killing Yamamoto was no ordinary mission. For many of them, it was personal. Pearl Harbor still burned in their memories. Mitchell continued. We fly 400 miles out, no higher than 50 feet over the water to avoid radar. We'll only have one shot. Make it count. At 7 a.m., the P-38s roared to life, twin booms slicing the dawn sky, skimming the waves like silver knives. 9:33 a.m., over Bougainville. The Japanese formation droned steadily southward, 2 Betty bombers and 6 Zero escorts. Inside Yamamoto's aircraft, his aide-de-camp glanced nervously at his watch. Sir, we are 5 minutes ahead of schedule. Yamamoto smiled faintly. A naval man is never late. Outside, the ocean glittered beneath the sunlight. A serene, perfect morning. Then, faint specks appeared on the horizon. At first, the Japanese pilots thought they were birds. Then, a moment later, sunlight flashed off metal. Enemy aircraft. 12 o'clock. The Zeros broke formation, screaming upward into the sun. The Bettys began evasive maneuvers, their engines straining as traces streaked through the sky. From behind a line of clouds, the P-38s dove in formation. Captain Thomas G. Lanphier Jr. led the charge. He rolled his aircraft and fired a burst from his .50 caliber machine guns. Rounds ripped into Yamamoto's plane. The right engine exploded in flame. Inside the fuselage, chaos erupted, smoke filled the cabin. Alarms blared, and men shouted over the roar of fire. Yamamoto stayed calm. He gripped the armrest, his cap falling to the floor. Keep her steady, he said to the pilot. The aircraft shuddered, then banked hard. The jungle below spun wildly. Seconds later, another burst of gunfire tore through the cockpit. The left engine failed. Yamamoto didn't cry out. Witnesses later said he sat upright even as the plane began to fall, his eyes fixed ahead. Unblinking. The G4M plunged through the trees, ripping branches like paper. A heartbeat later, the sound of the crash echoed across the jungle, then silence. By the time a Japanese search team reached the wreckage the next day, they found Yamamoto still seated in his chair, hand resting on his sword, his body untouched by flame. The medical officer wrote in his report, he died instantly. A bullet through the head and shoulder. His expression was calm, almost peaceful. When word reached Tokyo, the news was kept secret for weeks. Only a handful of officers were told. But those who had known him best understood the irony. The man who had foreseen Japan's defeat had died before seeing it unfold. And yet, in death, his prophecy lived on. For as his ashes were carried back across the Pacific, in the factories of Wichita, Kansas and Marietta, Georgia, the first B-29 Superfortresses rolled off the assembly lines, gleaming giants born from blueprints that Yamamoto had once studied in disbelief. The very weapon that had confirmed his fears was now being prepared to finish the war he had started. Wichita, Kansas, June 1944. The summer air shimmered over the vast expanse of the Boeing Wichita plant, where thousands of men and women, mechanics, riveters, machinists, engineers, moved in a rhythmic dance of steel and sweat. The sound was deafening, hammers striking aluminium, pneumatic drills whining, forklifts clattering over concrete floors. Under the arched skylights, B-29 fuselages lined up nose to tail like a procession of mechanical leviathans. Each aircraft represented nearly 100,000 individual parts. more than 300 miles of wiring, and 1 million man-hours of labor. Number 42-24592, ready for rollout, a foreman shouted, waving a clipboard. The great hangar doors slid open, sunlight spilling over the polished silver skin of the aircraft. The B-29 Superfortress emerged like something from another world, sleek, colossal, its four Wright R3350 engines glinting beneath the Kansas sun. The propellers turned once, twice, then roared to life, sending dust spiraling into the air. Watching from the balcony above, General Curtis LeMay, commander of the 21 Bomber Command, lit a cigar and squinted through the haze. He was only 38 but carried himself like a man twice that age, broad shoulders, jaw clenched, eyes sharp. Beautiful machine, someone beside him muttered. LeMay nodded. Let's see if she can burn Tokyo. For all its majesty, the B-29 had not come easily. Its engines overheated, its pressurization failed, mechanics cursed its wiring and controls. Several prototypes had crashed, but by mid-1944, the Superfortress was ready, and so was America. From Kansas, the first squadrons were shipped to the Marianas, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, islands captured in blood just months earlier. Thousands of Seabees labored day and night, turning jungles into airfields longer than any in history. By November, those runways were complete, and for the first time, bombers capable of flying 3.000 miles round-trip, high above storms, gunfire, and enemy patrols, now stood within striking distance of Japan itself. Tokyo, Japan, November 24, 1944. Sirens wailed in the night. The first B-29 raid in history was already inbound. At 35.000 feet, 111 Superfortresses from the 73rd Bombardment Wing thundered across the dark waters of the Pacific. Each carried 500-pound general-purpose bombs, their bellies packed with the promise of destruction. Lieutenant Jake Sully Sullivan, 21 years old and sweating inside the pressurized cabin, glanced out the window. Below him, the clouds glowed faintly in the moonlight, and somewhere beyond them, Tokyo slept. Navigator says 2 minutes to target. The bombardier called. Sully checked his altimeter, 34,000, climbing steady. The air was so thin the engines strained for breath. He could feel the vibration through the seat, a mechanical heartbeat. Bomb bay doors open. A rush of cold air filled the fuselage. Sully leaned forward, looking down. Through the clouds, he saw the faint glimmer of a city, street grids, rail lines, the river twisting like a silver thread. Target in sight, steady. Then, bombs away. Dozens of silver cylinders tumbled earthward, vanishing into the haze below. A few seconds later, flashes erupted far beneath them, silent at first, then trembling through the air as sound finally caught up. Tokyo burned for the first time that night. Below, fire brigades raced through the streets. Civilians ran barefoot through alleys, clutching children, prayer scrolls, anything they could carry. Many had never seen a bomber this high before. Their anti-aircraft guns burst harmlessly below the formation, shells exploding thousands of feet too low. Up in the sky, the B-29s banked away, untouched. The American crews cheered, relief and adrenaline mixing in their voices. To them, it was a clean strike, precise, professional, but to those on the ground, it was only the beginning. Imperial General Headquarters, Tokyo, 2 days later. A heavy silence blanketed the room. The Emperor's aides had gathered to review the first damage reports. Entire districts of Tokyo, factories, docks, rail yards, had been reduced to rubble. Thousands were dead. General Kawabe Masakazu spoke first. Our interceptors barely reached 10,000 meters before stalling. We could not engage. Across the table, an intelligence officer unrolled a captured American leaflet, dropped over Nagoya the previous day. It read, "We can reach any city, any time." No one spoke. The meaning was clear. In the corner, an older admiral stared at the map, his voice trembling as he whispered, "Just as Yamamoto warned." Another replied bitterly, "He saw this coming, and we did not listen." That night, as the fires of Tokyo smoldered against the horizon, an old naval aide, one who had served under Yamamoto at Truk, stood by the window of his barracks, watching the orange glow pulse through the clouds. He thought of the admiral's words from a year before, "If this aircraft becomes reality, Japan's fate will be sealed." And now it had. Above the ashes, invisible in the dark sky, the last of the B-29s droned homeward, their navigation lights blinking faintly. Like distant stars, they carried with them the sound of thunder that would soon return, louder, closer, deadlier. The war had entered its final act. Tokyo, Japan, March 9, 1945, 11:58 p.m. The night was windless, eerily calm. Over Tokyo Bay, the first wave of B-29 Superfortresses approached in silence, their massive silhouettes barely visible against the moonlit clouds. From the ground, they looked like moving stars, slow, deliberate, and impossibly high. At altitude 7.000 feet, much lower than usual, the lead bomber, General Curtis LeMay's new formation strategy, throttled down. The order had gone out days before: no more high-altitude precision. We go low, we go at night, and we burn 'em out. Each aircraft carried M69 incendiary cluster bombs, small, gasoline-filled canisters that would burst into a storm of fire on impact. Tokyo, a city of wood and paper, was about to become an ocean of flame. Inside one of the lead bombers, Captain Robert Mac McNamara, 21 years old, sat hunched over his bomb release panel. He could already smell the oil and cordite from earlier missions, a scent that clung to every fiber of his uniform. Sweat trickled down his neck despite the cool cabin air. The intercom crackled. Approaching primary target. All aircraft. Bomb doors open. He glanced down through the clear plexiglass. Below, Tokyo sprawled like a sleeping beast, a maze of rooftops and narrow lanes glowing faintly under the moon. The bombardier called out, voice tight. Target sighted, release on my mark. A few seconds passed, then, bombs away. The plane jolted as thousands of pounds of incendiaries tumbled out, vanishing into the darkness. Moments later, the city below erupted into light. First, single flashes, then hundreds, then thousands. Fire blossomed street by street, spreading in the wind like a living thing. Within minutes, the air over Tokyo turned red, a swirling inferno rising miles into the sky. From the cockpit, McNamara stared in stunned silence. Even at 7.000 feet, he could feel the heat licking through the fuselage. Jesus, he muttered, it's like the whole city's on fire. And it was. The second wave arrived 20 minutes later. Then the third. By 2 a.m., 279 B-29s had dropped nearly 1.700 tons of incendiaries. The fires merged into a single mass, a firestorm so intense that it created its own wind, pulling oxygen from the outskirts toward the center. In the districts of Shitamachi and Sumida, flames leapt from house to house faster than people could run. Asphalt melted, rivers boiled, those who fled to canals found no refuge, the air itself burned. Japanese civil defense workers tried to fight the fires with sand and buckets. But the heat was inhuman. Many simply collapsed, suffocating as the oxygen vanished. By dawn, 100,000 civilians were dead. More than 16 square miles of Tokyo, the heart of the empire, lay in ashes. The next morning, LeMay's report to Washington was brutally simple. Mission accomplished. Tokyo no longer exists. Imperial Palace, Tokyo, the following day. A heavy silence hung over the council chamber. The emperor had not spoken. His ministers stood in quiet shock, listening as casualty reports came in through the telephone lines. Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo broke the stillness. Entire wards have ceased to exist. The fires could be seen from Chiba. The B-29s returned unharmed. No one responded. The air smelled faintly of smoke. Even here, miles from the worst of it. Across the room, a portrait of Admiral Yamamoto hung in shadow. The emperor's eyes lingered on it for a long moment before he finally spoke. His voice was soft, weary. Yamamoto warned us, he said quietly. Now his ghost walks among the flames. The Prime Minister lowered his gaze. Your Majesty, our scientists are working on new weapons. New defenses, perhaps. The emperor cut him off. No weapon can defend an island that burns from the sky. Outside, the smoke of Tokyo's ruins still drifted upward, a dark pillar visible for miles. Like a wound that refused to close. Meanwhile, on Tinian Island, 1.500 miles away, the airfields were alive with motion, refueling trucks, armorers loading new bombs, ground crews checking engines. Over 400 B-29s lined the runways, their propellers glinting in the sunlight. In the command tent, General LeMay stood over a map of Japan. His cigar smoldered in the ashtray beside him. Tokyo burned well, he said flatly. Next, Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, every industrial target that feeds their war effort. An officer hesitated. Sir, at this rate, we'll level the entire country. LeMay looked up. That's the point. He wasn't exaggerating. Between March and August 1945, over 60 Japanese cities would be reduced to ashes. The B-29s flew nightly, their formations painting lines of fire across the Pacific sky. For those inside the aircraft, it became routine. For those below, it was the apocalypse. Tokyo, late June 1945. Among the rubble of the Imperial Navy offices, a surviving officer walked through the ruins of what had once been the operations room. The ceiling was gone, papers fluttered in the breeze. On the scorched wall, a single photograph still clung to its frame, Yamamoto, in full uniform, his hand resting on a globe. The officer brushed ash from the frame and whispered to no one. "You were right, sir, you were right about all of it." The wind answered him with silence. Above, faint and distant, another formation of B-29s droned toward yet another city. Their engines thundered across the sky, the same thunder Yamamoto had imagined on that rainy night in 1943. But this time, there was no one left to warn what it meant. Tinian Island, July 26, 1945, 5:45 a.m. The sun rose over the Pacific, its heat pressing down on Northfield. Thousands of airmen moved across the runways, fueling bombers, shouting over engines, the smell of oil and salt heavy in the air. Near Hangar 12, a small group of officers gathered around a single B-29. Its aluminium body bore no markings except a number, 4486292. Painted on its nose, in fresh black script, were two words, Enola Gay. Inside a nearby tent, Colonel Paul W. Tibbets studied a sealed folder marked Top Secret, Special Mission Number 13. He read softly. Objective, Hiroshima. Weapon, Little Boy. Estimated yield, 15 kilotons. Across from him, Captain William Parsons adjusted his glasses. "It's ready," he said. "The core's been assembled. All we need is clearance from Washington." Tibbets nodded. "Then we wait." Outside, other crews prepared for their nightly raids. None knew that one plane, and one weapon, would soon change the world forever. Tokyo, Japan, the same morning. The city was a graveyard of ash. Burned buildings jutted up like blackened teeth. Only the imperial palace remained standing amid the ruins. In his study, Emperor Hirohito read morning reports in silence. Osaka, Nagoya, destroyed. More dead, more cities gone. A messenger entered quietly. "Your Majesty, the Americans are preparing a new type of bomb." Hirohito looked up. "A new bomb? Our scientists believe it may be atomic, a weapon of unimaginable power." The Emperor's hand trembled. "And we cannot defend against it?" Number, Your Majesty. August 6, 1945 to 8:15 a.m. The sky over Hiroshima shimmered with heat. People worked, children walked to school, another ordinary morning. Then a single aircraft appeared overhead. Sirens wailed, then stopped. One plane was no threat. Moments later, the Enola Gay opened its bomb bay doors. The bomb fell for 43 seconds. At 1.900 feet, Little Boy detonated. The world turned white. A blinding flash erased the horizon. The shockwave tore through the city, buildings, bridges, and lives obliterated in an instant. A column of fire climbed 40,000 feet high. Inside the B-29, the plane jolted as the blast wave hit. Tibbets looked out the window and whispered, "My God!" Below, 70,000 souls were gone. 3 days later, Nagasaki. Another bomb, another city vanished. Nearly 200,000 dead. In the Imperial Palace, silence replaced speeches. The war's end was no longer a question, only when. On August 14, the Emperor gathered his ministers. Outside, B-29s circled endlessly over burning cities. "The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage," he said quietly. "If we continue to fight, it will mean the annihilation of our nation. We must endure the unendurable." Those words meant surrender. August 15, 1945 to 12 o'clock noon. Across Japan, civilians knelt before radios, hearing the Emperor's voice for the first time. "We have resolved to pave the way for a great peace, by enduring the unendurable and suffering what is insufferable." In the ruins of Tokyo, an old naval officer sat among the ashes, listening. Above him, one last formation of B-29s droned overhead, unopposed, unstoppable. He looked skyward and whispered, "You were right, Yamamoto, you were right." Washington, D.C., same day. In the Pentagon, General Henry Hap Arnold received the coded message. "Japan has accepted unconditional surrender." He placed the paper down slowly, cigar smoke curling in the air. Outside, crowds cheered and wept, waving flags in the streets. But in his office, Arnold stood in silence, staring east toward the Pacific. He thought of the men who had built the B-29s, the crews who flew them, and the millions who had died beneath their wings. The machine that ended the war had also ended something else, the age of limited war. From now on, the sky itself was a weapon. Tokyo Bay, September 2, 1945. The battleship USS Missouri rocked gently under a gray sky. On its deck, American, British, and Japanese officers stood in silence. At 9:04 a.m., Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu stepped forward and signed Japan's surrender. General Douglas MacArthur stood beside him, unflinching. Above, a formation of nearly 500 B-29 Superfortresses thundered across the sky, unarmed, their shadows sweeping over the bay like silent wings of judgment. Epilogue. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had died 2 years before this day, but his ghost lingered in every engine's roar above Tokyo Bay. He had foreseen it all: the triumph of machines, the death of tradition, the futility of courage against industry. The B-29 was more than a bomber. It was prophecy made of steel. And as ink dried on Japan's surrender, one truth remained. The war was not lost in the skies above Hiroshima, it was lost the day Yamamoto first saw the blueprint of the superfortress.